Hey guys, welcome into the 14. My name's Nick Cole, and it's week 3 of the SEC football season, and we're breaking down every matchup from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the New Mexico Lobos visiting the number 7 Texas A&M Aggies. Both teams 2-0. They're going to meet at Kyle Field at noon Eastern on Saturday, and that game will be aired on the SEC Network. From a betting standpoint, this game opened with Texas A&M as a 25-point favorite. That line has shot up all the way to Texas A&M being favored by 30 points. And then the over-under has moved a little bit as well, opened at 48.5 and is up to 50.5. I'm going to go ahead and bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith, to talk about that change. And Christopher, what are you thinking about the Aggies after a 2-0 start here?
Yeah, you got to expect that the Aggies, the 12th man, as well as Jimbo Fisher, breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief after they ended up winning the game against Colorado and Denver. And they shouldn't have that kind of struggle this week, but I guess we'll find out soon. And regardless of the spread and how separate these two rosters are, I mean, doesn't prevent us from making money at the betting window. So before we get into the betting analysis, Nick, why don't you give us Nick's news and notes and tell us the weather, injuries, and the headlines that are surrounding the Texas A&M program right now?
Sure. So let's start with the weather. Believe it or not, it's going to be hot in Texas on Saturday. And with that noon Eastern kickoff, 11 local time, there's going to be plenty of hot early afternoon weather in College Station. And so the forecast is for low 90s, but the heat index is up to 98, which is quite a bit hotter than you, Christopher. I know you lived in New Mexico for a bit of time, quite a bit hotter than maybe the Lobos are used to in their local climate there with that elevation. But the good news is there's no real rain threat here, and the wind should be pretty manageable. So from a standpoint of betting, I don't know that we should be worried about it anything beyond the heat. And otherwise, on the injury standpoint, obviously something that has been a headline for Texas A&M ever since the second drive of that game against Colorado is Haynes King, their starting quarterback, who left with a leg injury. As it turns out, it was a bone cracked in his leg, according to Jimbo Fisher, and he's undergone surgery this week, and they're expecting him to miss anywhere between the next 4 to 7 weeks, which is a pretty wide time frame right here in the early middle part of the season. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Aggies react to not having their starting quarterback. Sure, he only started 2 games, but still, a guy that they broke camp confident was going to be the one to potentially lead them to the college football playoff. That brings me down to just talking about what happened in the Aggies' 10-7 win against Colorado on Saturday. It's not a score that we maybe anticipated coming out of that game. We may have thought, okay, it'll be a low scoring, but it took everything that A&M had after King's injury to get to 10 points. And they turned to backup quarterback Zach Calzada in this game that was on national TV on Fox. And I tell you, I watched a lot of that game, Christopher, on Saturday afternoon, and I was nervous for the Aggies, but being not impressed with Calzada. Sure, he was thrown in a tough situation where he probably wasn't expecting to play it as much as he did. And he was playing behind the line that maybe didn't give him as much help as he needed, but he completed just 18 of 38 passes, fumbled a ball going across the goal line, and what we thought was the key score of the game. And really, luckily, it wasn't the momentum turning turnover that we thought it might have been at the time. And then, of course, on the flip side of that, if you're trying to look at a glass half full, he didn't turn the ball over through the air. He threw no interceptions out of those 38 passes. So maybe this is just me being a little bit overcritical because he found a way to win. The Aggies found a way to win with him at quarterback, maybe a better way to put it. And now Jimbo's had a full week to sort of install what they want to do with Calzada, knowing it's going to be him for the foreseeable future. And I think when you talk about what you look ahead at their schedule, this week is going to be an important week for them to figure out exactly what they're going to look like for the next 4 to 7 weeks without King. It's going to be formative, if nothing else. It should be enough to, Calzada should be enough to beat New Mexico, but I guess what we're asking is, who on their schedule coming up can they beat in the West? And the last thing I'd bring up before I turn it over to you on the betting side of things is that when you tune in to watch this game, New Mexico is going to have a starting quarterback that everybody's going to be pretty familiar with as an SEC fan. They've got former Kentucky quarterback Terry Wilson playing for them, and hey, he's actually looked pretty good in their first couple of games. Now, they haven't been playing the stiffest competition as I'm sure you'll probably talk about here in a minute. But he threw for 385 yards and 3 touchdowns to lead New Mexico to a 34-23 win against New Mexico State. And those programs are not always the best, but that New Mexico State game is a well-respected rivalry in that state. He's completed 74% of his passes, thrown 6 touchdowns to no interceptions, and they're 2-0. Hey, they haven't played anybody great, but they're still 2-0. And I wonder how much of that factored into where this line's at and how it's moved so much. Christopher, from a betting perspective, what do you think about New Mexico being 2-0, Texas A&M being without their starting quarterback, and all the things that go with this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you look at Texas A&M against Colorado, and Colorado had 8 players in the box almost the whole game after Calzada got in the game. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's concerning that Texas A&M couldn't just line up and run on Colorado, but when you have 8 guys in the box, it's hard to run on any team. And the Texas A&M offensive line is the major concern for me on that offense. I mean, the quarterback was always a question mark going into this season, but I think the offensive line is really, really concerning. And Isaiah Spiller is a fine SEC back, but he's going to be handcuffed by that offensive line all year. And with King out for the foreseeable future and the SEC schedule up next, I'm kind of curious and wondering if Jimbo Fisher might let Calzada turn it loose a little bit in this game. I mean, he's got to take some shots in the SEC, and they can't, face eight-man boxes all year and just hand the ball off over and over again. So he's going to have to throw the ball against Arkansas. So, why not let him get in a few shots in this game where the outcome is less of a stress for you? He did look a little shell-shocked behind that line when he got suddenly thrown in against Colorado in a competitive game. And if they had scored that touchdown that he fumbled on, 17-7 with 2 touchdowns in their last 2 drives, maybe not quite as much buzz around that game. But, looking at the other side of the ball, this is the 3rd dual threat quarterback that Texas A&M has faced. And you look at Dustin Crum at Kent State, Brandon Lewis at Colorado, and they threw for 3.5 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions against A&M. So no worries with a dual threat quarterback being able to throw on the Aggies defense. And I mean, I don't care what Terry Wilson's stats were against an FCS team and against maybe the worst, maybe outside of UConn, the worst defense of any FBS team in New Mexico State. I mean, he could not beat or do anything against bottom feeder SEC East teams when he had an SEC roster around him at Kentucky, at least a powerhouse offensive line. Now you're going against one of the better defenses in the country with New Mexico's skill talent instead of Kentucky's skill talent. So the only thing with Texas A&M is they did give up almost 7 yards of carry to those dual threat quarterbacks. So not a great spot for them coming off of a game they played at altitude with Arkansas up next. And maybe Wilson can run off a few runs. On the other side, New Mexico gave up 25 points to New Mexico State and 17 to Houston Baptist. So don't expect Texas A&M to be limited to 10 here. And, it should be better on defense than last year. The Lobos, they have 9 starters back, and it's the second year of Danny Gonzalez's system. You might remember that. He was the defensive coordinator for Rocky Long at San Diego State. Now Rocky Long is his DC at New Mexico. Not exactly the best spot for New Mexico either. I mean, they're coming off a hated in-state rivalry, a big win for them. And they got to go in the conference play and face UTEP on the road next week. So, a lot going on in this game, a lot of different variables. What are you betting on this game, Nick? And how do you think people are going to get to the window?
Okay, so full disclosure, we make these picks for every game, and we keep track of them for purposes of me being able to show that I'm a better SEC gambler than you are, right? But sometimes that involves picking games that you don't really want to pick, and maybe games like you mention often that you wouldn't put your own money on. And this one for me falls squarely into that category. 30 points is a lot to lay for a team that scored 10 points last week. And granted, it is on the road against a better team, but they're without their quarterback. They've got offensive line issues. So I just don't feel comfortable laying 30 points to any team with A&M right at this moment. I'm not saying that later in the year I wouldn't do it in a different circumstance, but this is a spot where you're trying to get right, but you're trying to get right in a way that you protect your team. And I could see when you get up big in this game, go ahead and calling off the dogs and making sure everybody's healthy, getting into conference play next week. That being said, give me New Mexico plus 30 in a game that I definitely wouldn't actually bet my money on the Lobos, but for the sake of picking games, give me them plus 30 and then give me the over 50.5, just because I think that to your point, what you said earlier, I think Calzada, Fisher's going to want to know what he's got in him. So I think they're going to throw the ball a little bit and we may see some points because of that. So give me the over 50.5 and New Mexico plus 30. How are you seeing this?
Yeah, so I'm a little worried just because of Fisher's tendencies. He's one of those old school coaches. You remember the game that he played week 1 last year against Vanderbilt, where they were as vanilla as humanly possible on offense, and they just kind of ran the clock down, grinded it out. There's always a chance that you can get that out of a Jimbo Fisher team. He's an old school guy, kind of don't show your hand against weaker opponents. And, I am just going to cross my fingers and count on the fact that A&M has got to show something on offense. They got to get their young quarterback some experience, and they got to find something with that offensive line that will work. They've got very talented skill players, actually, if they could put it together on the line and a quarterback, and they can make some explosive plays. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that maybe Jimbo Fisher will turn it loose at least a little bit in the first half. If so, we could see a pretty big number by Texas A&M's offense in this game. So I'm going to go Texas A&M minus 30 and over 50.5. I don't expect Terry Wilson and the Fighting Lobos to be able to do much of anything at all on offense. Wouldn't surprise me if we had a single-digit points effort or even a shutout from them. But I'm going to count on Texas A&M offense showing us something. So I'll take the side with A&M and I'll take over 50.5. But for Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith with the 14, and we'll catch you next week.